Hi, I'm Tom Payton, Director and Publisher at Trinity University Press. Thanks for joining us for the Maverick Book Club. The books we discuss in this monthly series explore the rich stories of Texas. But in this first season, we've been focused on our hometown, San Antonio. Be it a provocative look at life here during World War II, or a discussion about writing the Black history of our city. The series aims to be as diverse as the city itself. In this episode, we'll visit with legendary San Antonio artist Pat Hammond, author of the book Name Them, They Fly Better, and who best to lead this discussion than her son, Robert Hammond from New York. They simply are two of the warmest, most interesting, and engaging people I have met in San Antonio, and I know that we'll all enjoy this discussion. Enjoy yourself, and in the end, don't forget to check out the book that we'll all be reading and talking about next month, Revolutionary Women of Texas and Mexico. Thanks again for joining us, and welcome to Robert and Pat.
Hi, I'm Robert Hammond, and this is my mother, Pat Hammond. And Mother, I'm so grateful for you doing this with me. We are here to talk about a book that was written, when did we do this book? In 2017, called Name Them, They Fly Better, about my mother. This book was written by Christopher Ornelas, who did a series of interviews with my mother over time and put this together. And then the pictures are by Mark S'more, and the pictures, I'm going to pull some pictures up later on the screen so we can actually look at them. And it was published by Trinity University Press. And so, Mother, I thought just, for us just to have a conversation. And, partly I was excited to do this because, this was a very personal project for me. And, one of the things that Chris says in the book is that, because he and I consider you an artist. And it's one thing I'd love to talk to you about, because I know that's not how you describe yourself, but I think he and I and many others consider you an amazing artist. But I feel like a lot of artists, you are part of your artwork. It's not like a painting or a sculpture or a book that lives on and you don't need the artist's involvement to appreciate it. I feel like you are integral to the art. And that's one of the reasons I wanted Chris. I asked Chris to help on this project. I didn't tell you when we were starting it why we were doing it, but it was really because I wanted, I feel like your art is part of my inheritance, but it's not an inheritance that will necessarily live on in its physical form afterwards, because the pieces aren't that interesting without you describing them. And so that's why I wanted Chris.
I've written you out of the will.
Because of the book?
No.
I've already taken some of the stuff. But so first, let's, just talk, why have you always been reluctant? The way I describe, when people say, tell me about your mother, I said, well, if she had been born a few decades later, she would have been called an artist her whole life. And I think she would have called herself an artist. But why did you cringe when I said that, and what do you think of yourself as?
I mean, frankly, I don't think of myself. I mean, maybe I think I'm tired or amused or something. I don't know. I just do. I guess I don't know.
No, I think that's part of
what memory loss. Like I used to. I mean, you just do what comes natural.
Yeah. And well, you brought up the memory loss. That was one of the things that got me thinking about the book, is when you got diagnosed with dementia, and luckily it's been so slow. And I think one of the great things when I tell people that my mother has dementia, they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I mean, I'm wish you didn't either, but I feel like you've changed so little. And your attitude around it is like so amazing. I don't know if you want to talk about it a little bit.
Well, sure. I mean, of course, I'm not denying it, but what people, no one can know. Um, they're quick or to answer one question: what color dress do you have on? But dementia, I have this storage of memory that's still there. I can have it for a long time. I feel like it's a luxury that I can just, those, I have enough memories to, and current, I mean, like Rigsby, I wouldn't have, I mean, that's, in a memory, it's a fact.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. It's impressive. Sometimes I forget his name. So for those of you, I have a 2.5-year-old son named Rigsby, who is actually named after the woman in the painting in back of my mother. That is my great grandmother who built the house that my mother's sitting in.
Great grandmother.
Great grandmother, and her maiden name was Rigsby, and her son's name, my grandfather, name was Rigsby, and it's my son's name. And so, yeah, I always say the first thing my mother asks about is Rigsby. She never forgets Rigsby. And I always think about it like, I mean, I don't really want to ask you what you had for breakfast, and knowing you won't remember, I don't really care what you had for breakfast. And you remember, we were talking about Rigsby's going through the phase where he's hitting us and throwing things. And you told me this quote from Emily Dickinson about sort of, I don't know, it was something about agony and ecstasy in equal measure.
Oh, no. It's for each ecstatic instant, we must in anguish pay in keen and quivering ratio to the ecstasy.
And that I don't know one line of poetry that I remember, so that you have so much Emily Dickinson that is still available to you.
She didn't have children.
Yeah, but then I told Dan my version of that quote, which I butchered.
Well, she would just be thrilled that you butchered it.
And I promise to come back to the art part, but let's talk about words and your love of words. I grew up in a house with, how many dictionaries do you think we have in our house?
Not enough.
How many dictionaries can you see in that room?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, that's enough. That's just in one room.
Well, but the big ones are, there's some big ones.
No, I know, and old and new. But what about words? Why? And did you always love them?
I think I did. I didn't like one aspect of them, which was spelling. I mean, how are we going to communicate, without them? And they can be loaded, they can be lies, or.
But you especially love puns. I mean, I grew up with a lot of puns.
Well, upon what subject? Puns were looked down on. They were a kind of cheap way of getting around something. I mean, they didn't have a reputation of, I mean, different people have, I mean, like upon what subject, depending on, but it has, they have a kind of playful quality.
Yeah, and you like, I mean, I think of the way you use puns also, there's usually a physical piece that then played, like, you know, in our kitchen, there's a giant staff, like a shepherd's crook. And it's, you know, and you're not sure why it's there. And then the pun is, you know, our staff is happy to help you.
No, or you can tip our staff.
No.
You can move it.
Oh, see, I never even knew that part. You can tip it. Oh, I know.
You know, that I had just come to San Antonio and Jeff was kind of a new baby, and it was a new town, and these women were very generous and cordial and asked me to go to lunch, and the entire luncheon, or the group, they were all talking about their staff and how they, you know, were having trouble with it. And you know, I was just thinking, do I have a staff? So that's why that staff is in the kitchen. And you know, people can tip it and do whatever they want to with it. And,
I mean, the other way you've done, and one of my favorite, I feel like you've turned your, you know, clothes into an art piece, because it also relates, the pins relate to the puns, and most people that know you, they can look at what you're wearing, and they know there's some trick or pun to it. Like that one, the pin you have on right now, what is it called?
well, it's a coming and going. It's a hawk over here and a goose going that way. So it's, you know, just, you can whichever way you need to go, you can. I I didn't know what pin to wear.
I know you asked me.
I didn't want to be dependent on asking.
I mean, Chris did a whole chapter on pins and dresses, and it's one of my favorite stories is that you never shopped for clothes the whole time your mother was alive. And when my grandmother, your mother, died, you didn't know what to do because you had never bought dresses into your 50s. You were probably in your 50s, right? Or maybe it was 40s. I don't know.
Well, old enough.
Old enough that you should have been know how to shop. So,
you know, she loved to buy them, but she also sewed, and she would, you know, make a lot of my dresses.
And so then how did your uniform come about?
When she died, I thought, I've got to find a way to get dressed. I mean, I knew this is the dress. I just changed the
There was
color.
one dress you liked, and then you just found a dressmaker to make it in different patterns.
No, same pattern.
Oh, same pattern.
Color. But the fun part for me about dressing, I mean, I do it, you know, once a day at least, and is the pen.
Yeah.
That's fun for me to think about. And, you know, I love to entertain an idea. And so basically, just since people can't, so she has this one pattern dress, and then it's either short sleeve or long sleeve, and then different fabrics. So no, they're all the same fabric. Color.
Well, sometimes you used to wear one of raw silk to dress up.
All raw silk.
Oh, they're all raw silk.
Uh-huh.
See, I'm learning things. So every day, I thought they were wool or something, some in the winter. But so the only difference is short sleeve and long sleeve.
I mean, this is, and now it's just kind of halfway.
Now, so you just cut the difference. Do you want to stand up just so they see? I don't know what you call it. It's just this waist. Yep. And then almost, I mean, sometimes you wear the same pins, but you know, the story I always tell is that you would always keep super glue and pin backs, or is that do you, or magnets to be able to make a pin, and so you could just make a pin during the day as well.
This is not magnets.
Okay, that's the pin backing.
That's just,
yeah. And that's made out of silver. I love the one you used to cut them out of cans too, aluminum cans, the back of aluminum can.
And then I found a man in Mexico that I could just send cut out a piece of paper, and he would make them. And they're probably 100. And not that I've worn them all.
And some of them,
I would never wear in public. Or,
I mean, also the thing I like Chris talks about in the book is that, sort of you as an unconventional feminist. He says you both conform and don't conform to the traditional gender roles. Her art, like her life, is a contradiction of sorts. She's a tomboy by nature, but she only wears a dress. She hates fashion, but she wears jewelry. That dad was in the jewelry business, selling estate jewelry, and you were more comfortable wearing interesting shaped rocks or something cut from a tin can.
Well, I do like silver.
Yeah.
And silver, I think there's a kinship with silver because it can tarnish, and we can tarnish, and it can be cleaned and polished, and not that I feel very polished, but I can polish the pens, and so I'm not dependent on.
But I also thought the thing that was interesting that I identify with myself too is you sort of belong and don't belong in groups. You sort of are on this sort of edge, because I love the story. I never thought of you as, I always thought of you were always fit, but I thought of you as the least athletic person. And then I found out that you one time, won the country club tennis championship. And then you basically never played tennis again. And our house was full of cookbooks. I never saw you cook. You would master something and then sort of, I don't know, lose interest, or wanting to have that skill or be part of something, but then also wanting to be separate. What do you think that was or is?
Well, it's all just kind of flows. I mean, yes, I cooked.
I want to go back to the art, because I think one of your, you really, part of your art is the house that I grew up in, that you filled with collections. And I remember you taught me, if you have 2 of anything, you have a collection.
3.
Oh, 3.
Uh-huh.
3, then you have a collection.
Yeah.
And, to me, I grew up, it was totally normal if you went to a store and there was, a lot of any one thing, you would buy as many as they had. Like, we had 400 plastic Dracula teeth in a jar next to, wax red lips. And it
think you're exaggerating.
Well, how many Dracula teeth do you think we've had in that house over the years?
You mean that we still wear, just exist, or?
I mean, you've definitely bought hundreds of Dracula teeth.
No, maybe.
No. But wasn't there a magic store that was going out of business and you went in there and you bought his entire stock?
Um, a lot. Entire.
And just so people don't think that these are collections of necessarily valuable objects, I mean, you probably never bought anything that cost more than 50 cents a piece. I mean, it was mostly things that were, pennies, but that when you put them all together in a basket, it has a whole different.
Well, they have to have something kind of like a personality. If a thing can have a personality. But
then why do you need, what does the personality become when you have multiple? Why didn't you just buy one Dracula teeth?
Well, then I could give it away. If I had more, I could give it. And
some of the things you didn't buy, sorry, that's my phone, like you collected cicada carcasses or cicada shells. So why do we in our house have a bowl of cicada? How do you say it?
Cicada.
Cicada, shells in our house. Probably you're not giving those away, or maybe people do want them, but.
No, but most people don't know what a cicada is. And
What is it?
It's kind of like a cricket, but it's big, and well, that's kind of
the noise you hear in the background in the South.
And it's in the, I think, heat of the day, and I don't know if how they make these, how they communicate, but they do, and then they shed their skin and leave that shell, and it's just very fragile, and you can see where they came out of it, and they have another life. And I don't know, I've kind of gotten this. I still have a jar full. Oh, here.
Did someone bring them?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so hold it up, it's helpful.
See here, with a cicada, it's.
Oh, because it was a grub. They're grub worms that then become, yeah. Yeah.
And they open up here and are
fly out.
Uh-huh. This is real grubby looking. And then when they come out of that shell, they unfold and they're just fabulous and fly off.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, speaking of flying off, did someone give you a note? Or you, often there's little notes in the collection. So these are notes I assume you've written.
Okay, this is a cicada hears with its stomach. I mean, that's interesting enough to get you kind of hooked. And then they have this shell, and it opens, and then they are transformed and they fly off. I mean, it's and it's in the dog days. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. In Texas, the dog days are hot summer days, and those cicadas just come out and they're this gorgeous green and leave that shell behind.
And I bet there's not very many of your neighbors that call cicadas gorgeous, but I agree. I love that you're, again, they're sort of this nuisance animal, so most people aren't collecting their shells.
Well, you're not. Let's don't call them a nuisance.
Okay. Well, speaking of cicadas, I mean, I think in San Antonio, your nickname, or what a lot of people know you as, is the Kite Lady. Because at one time, I think, you had one of the largest collections of kites in the U.S.
Well, it was all an accident. It was, I don't know, many, many years ago. And
before, I think I was one. I think it was I was one. It was in 1969, I think, around when I was born.
And Hall read about this contest in Washington at the Smithsonian, and he said, "Why don't you go? I, have trips and travel, and I want you to go." And I said, "I think that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I don't want to go." And we had more conversation, and in my theory of all these theories of aerodynamics and leftover drag and all that, and mine was, if you name them, they'll fly better. And so I'd never made a kite that I didn't name, and this was Red Tails on the Sunset, and somehow or another I knew that the Smithsonian motto, or somebody Washingtonian's motto, was, "We have interests wherever the sun sets," which means global. And so I made this kite, and it could have been a sun. I mean, and that was when I came up with the name them, and they'll fly better.
And then you won.
And then, we had this little group, and we hung around to see which of these things fabulous, incredible things were going to win. And then this man, I guess he was the head of the Smithsonian, and he had this huge trophy, and he had the most painful look on his face, and it was like his mouth was pursed, and like, this is killing me that I have to announce who won. And he said with clenched teeth, "We hear a great deal about women's liberation." And so when he said that, we just threw our things up in the air and screamed and hollered and acted and grabbed the trophy and went back across, into the Hay Adams Hotel, this old fabulous hotel right across the street. And all the people in every worker, the hotel, came up, and they were more excited than, wow, did you hear something else?
It was on April Fool's Day.
Yeah, well, that was why we went. It was.
You were the only woman in the competition.
Oh, yeah, that's what he said. Yeah. We hear a great deal about, oh, Hall's coming with the
trophy. I grew up with that. I remember that trophy. I always thought it was a cool trophy.
Oh gosh, it probably needs to be dusted off.
See the dust.
Can you see it?
Yeah, no, and Mother, that's what got, because I guess that was when I was born. And then, growing up, you had a lot of interests and a lot of collections, but kites was also the main, you eventually had kite shows at the Dallas Museum of Art. MoMA included one of your kites in a show that they had, because they weren't, but so I grew up as you as the kite lady, but I never remember going and flying a kite with you until I was like, I think the first kite you gave me was when I graduated from college. So it wasn't as much about flying the kites after that. They were, because they were art pieces. You made most of them. I know a lot of them were puns. What was it? And there's pictures of the kites. A lot of them are based on puns. And in the book, we reprint some of the pages from your book about kites that was published called Catechism.
Oh yeah, I had a catechism, and it had a bunch of sketches of kites that were named, and they were never made or anything, but that was my catechism. Yeah.
But your interest in kites, wasn't really about flying them. If kites were sort of a metaphor for something, or?
Well, this was just, the kite came to me as a gift. Rowena and David brought it from Nantucket. And it was just something that I'd never thought about or given 2 seconds of thought about. And it was such a, I don't know if it was the time in my life, but it had such a good feel. You were standing outside in the wind. It wasn't just a hot summer day. It was just a gentle breeze, and I could just do this and let the string out and it would go up.
But again, most of the time you were making kites. You were thinking of kites. You weren't flying them. So what was it? Why were you, what was the kite as a metaphor for? Because it wasn't about flying the kites, because most of the time you never flew them. What was it?
Well, I think, well, for one thing, it was the feeling to fly a kite, you have to look up.
Yeah.
And I think that had, my day was, you were out of diapers, but you were little, and
yeah,
you didn't look. I had no reason to look up. I could look upstairs, but that's not looking at the sky. And the looking up and the feel of that string going, it gave me a calming, it was just a wonderful.
Yeah. No, I remember, who was it you or someone, you always would tell me it's hard to have a bad feeling when you're looking up.
No, Mother, Graham.
Oh, your mother said it.
My mother said that, when I went to Brian, I vaguely remember my dad making kites. I don't remember them flying, or it wasn't memorable, happy, whoa, there it goes. Yeah. And it was, nobody flew a kite. That maybe someone crazy, or, it just wasn't something you did.
Well, and the first time we really flew kites together was when I graduated from college. I graduated in 1993, and you gave me a kite with one kite with 93 kites on one string, and they can show a picture of it. And you made a lot of those, a few of those that you flew. I love there's a picture of you flying all of them, and you gave me gloves. I still have the kites. I took them out to Governor's Island and flew them, and you have to wear gloves because the pull of, even though each one is this big, if you can imagine, the pull is it's equal to the total.
I mean, there's just, I mean, I want to hang up and go do it just right now.
And I remember when you first started doing the multiple kites on a string, you made them bigger, and you tied the string to a dumpster, and it was moving the dumpster because the Frank, and so you realized that wasn't a smart. You had to make the kites smaller.
Big kites that were that, but what I want to say is that, Hall was, I mean.
So Hall, for those of you who don't know, my dad and her, sometimes she used to say long-suffering husband, is sort of a co-conspirator in all this, because what was Dad's involvement? Because you weren't a traditional, I mean, just so people know, we grew up in a wealthy San Antonio suburb, and you were definitely not like the other suburban wives, probably, I imagine, in the 1960s.
Well, I can't say what other people thought. I'm sure there was plenty of head scratching.
But what was Dad's relationship in all this? When you
Well, he was the one that said go. I mean, he traveled on business, and he said, I think you ought to go. And
yeah.
He said, call a friend and go. And
I feel like Dad really, I mean, it was interesting because he was so supportive of.
Well, and I called, well,
Can I change the subject?
Sure.
Okay. Because I just want to finish the kites thing. And, your most controversial kite was this. This is a drawing of it, but you actually made one of a kite made out of a corset, and its name was.
Of course it flies, but will it last underwear?
Yeah, I don't even remember that second part. And it was in a show at the Midland Museum of Art.
Well,
you had a whole bunch. You had a full show at the museum, and that was one of them.
Museum, and that was one of the kinds. And it was, I mean, the person.
I know you can't say whose corset it was. It's a well-known San Antonio matron who is probably long gone.
One of the most generous people in the.
And you mean generous by big?
Both.
And somehow you came across her corset. And why did you keep it? Why did you buy her corset, or how did you end up with her corset?
Somebody, when she died, her clothes went to the Junior League rummage sale, and somebody, I can't remember, Louis Tarver found it or something and gave it to me for a birthday present.
You had this corset for many years without a use, but it was.
Well, I mean.
Of course you kept it because.
Of course.
Yeah, of course you kept it.
And so, but that just seemed like.
And so this corset was up in the museum, and that someone complained about it, that it was obscene or women's underwear.
In the Dallas Museum of Art. I mean, it had been.
Yeah.
I mean, not little tiny shows.
Yeah.
And this was in Midland, which is, not a big city, but but lots of sophisticated people. And so I get a call from one of the people that I knew out there, and she said, "Dad, I took my parents to see the kite shows, and we couldn't find the horsey." And I said, "Oh, it probably just fell, and they haven't put it up." And so the next Monday, I called out and asked what was wrong. Said, and this person that was an enormous benefactress of that museum, and this man that was in charge he just kept saying, "It's ladies' underwear. It's ladies' underwear." Like I had stripped in the museum or something. And so, I said, "That's fine," but then I get the call and they were asking me, and I said, "Well, I just had this interesting experience."
Is it USA Today did a little story about the censorship? That's what I remember.
Well, the Wall Street Journal had called, and it was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal at the top of the page in that little. I mean, that was the most publicity.
I wanted to say when we were talking about pens, and I forgot. Inspired by you, because I wear sort of the same boring white or dark blue shirt every day, and so I've had friends start painting things. This is an artist named Dalia El Sayed on my shirt, so I give them a shirt and they can do whatever they want.
Oh, I love it.
And sometimes, I mean, you've seen. Sometimes I do my own, or I put stamps, or they're not quite as clever as yours. Usually it's something coming out of it. I've also gotten into doing iron-ons, like a picture. If I find a neat picture, I'll print on an iron-on paper and iron it on. I did it more before the baby was born, but it's obviously, when people ask about it, I said, well, I'm just copying my mother.
Well, Robert, you've got to get used to not saying the baby was born.
Oh, because it's not a baby.
I mean, he's gonna. You don't want him to hear baby.
Okay.
He is your baby.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh.
Well, I mean, just some of the things. Growing love telling all these stories about you, and growing up when. I think I asked how paper was made, and so you promptly took me outside. You cut down some bamboo, then you cut off part of the screen porch. Then you put the bamboo in the blender with some newspaper, and we made paper, which was a normal occurrence in our house. Just taking. I know you don't like the story, but we would also go and get scraps from. The stationery store.
Oh yeah, where they cut.
Because I know you don't like to say we went in the dumpster, but I do think we got out of the dumpster.
Oh yeah.
I was dumpster diving at a young, and then we'd come home and make books, and you had binding, and we made, some of it was more dangerous. Like the one that I think is sort of like is we would boil lead on the stove and then pour it into seashells to make paperweights. Which probably wasn't.
Let's change the verbs.
Okay.
Like instead of saying like you did, we would da 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 da. We did it once.
Okay, we did. Yes, because most of these things, yes, we did it.
I mean, it
once. Yes. So some lead exposure. I mean, and I seem fine now. So. And then another hobby, when I was. That I thought, was bees. You installed a live beehive in our TV room, that had a little passageway to go outside.
Yes, but it was it was called an observation hive.
Okay.
A beehive, you think of as a box.
Oh, it has to have multiple. It only had one panel of wax.
And this was just one, and they could, crawl underneath
And go outside. I mean, they didn't go in the house. Sometimes they got in the house, but usually
that's
they
why
would
they
go
were
outside.
called observation.
Okay. And it had glass panels, and then it had covers you put.
It
And
was-
then I remember we got the queen bee by mail. Came in a little box.
Mhm. And it was a little wooden box that
I know. I claimed that didn't happen, and you showed me the box. You still have the box.
and there was wax or something in between what the bee could smell, and I can't remember. But
It's so if you just put the queen in the hive, the other bees will kill the queen because they don't recognize her. And so it was a piece of sugar, and so that the bees have to eat the sugar. By the time they get through the sugar, they're used to the queen bee's smell, and they hopefully don't kill the queen bee.
I mean, there can only be one.
Yeah.
And they need a queen. And so it's, that's been going on for longer than we've been going on. I mean, and
But and then you became obsessed with bees, and there was a lot, and honey.
it was just interesting. It wasn't a constant, I didn't have to change the hive I mean, they were
Self-sufficient.
right. And they went, it was upstairs, and that wasn't, we couldn't go out where that window was. And I could unscrew and take it to schools
Of course.
yeah. And then let them taste honey.
Yeah.
Because that, I can't remember who said it, but I live by this, living is like licking honey off a thorn. And so that started. And I jumped up, ran downstairs, got a toothpick, dipped it in honey. I'd had the bees for a long time.
And you read this quote. And then you ran downstairs and tested it?
Well, I had used the honey like syrup, just, but to lick honey off of a thorn was just the right amount. It just explodes in your mouth.
And so if anybody comes to our house, she has that up. There's actually a picture in the book of the honey and all the toothpicks, the thorns for you to.
Like I'm coughing now. Sometime I'll go over there in the morning after I've read the paper or something and just get, you're kind of hungry, you kind of like something sweet, but no, you don't need it. But if you dip that toothpick in there and then roll it around your mouth, and that's all you need. And then that's Emily Dickinson is the one that said living is like licking honey. I think it was Emily Dickinson. Living is like licking honey off a thorn. And that's what started that.
And so, one of the things people often, because I love telling these stories, is people say, you must have loved, how much fun was your childhood? But and now it doesn't, but at the time I was also sort of embarrassed because I felt like, I knew my friends' mothers weren't, because one time one of the distinct memories I have is coming home, walking home from school and coming into the kitchen, and there was a stork neck, that you were decomposing, putting bleach on to be able to get the stork vertebra, instead of making in cookies, because you had a collection of animal vertebra became a big interest. Now I won't say obsession. I think because there were always multiple of the interests, so there was never one, but that you became interested in getting animal vertebrae.
Well, I never killed an animal.
Yeah. Well, people would bring us roadkill.
Yeah, or clean it, let's talk about something else.
Okay. Well, now that you won't get arrested, Mother, talking about other illegal things that you did do taxidermy at home, which weren't supposed to do, because you're supposed to have a license to do taxidermy, and you would taxidermy some birds, right? Or do you not want to talk about it?
Maybe 3 or 4. I don't know. Not.
Okay. Well, you're not going to get arrested, Mother. If you got arrested for that now, it would.
I was respectful of those.
Yeah.
And I had a permit.
Oh. For the birds.
From the Fish and Wildlife.
Yeah.
Because flight, the birds could, we just think our flight is miraculous, but it's the birds that really have flight. We can't fly. Yeah. We can fly on a plane, but.
And they gave you that permit for educational purposes, because you would take them to school and show them to kids.
I like to, some teachers were, I could kind of read their attitude. Here's somebody that'll talk to my kids. I can leave. I don't have to do it for 30 minutes or something. And then some teachers that, prepared kids and had to go back, and, it was just, everyone was different in it, but I love doing that. And going to the schools, and and
Mother, you used to always say, don't take yourself too seriously because you're just a bag of bones and a hank of hair. Was that, whose quote was that? Do you remember?
I don't know.
But you did say that. I didn't make that up, did I?
No. But as to who originally, I think that's maybe the bag of bones and a hank of hair might be biblical, or that's that's an old phrase, and I don't know who said it first.
Yeah,
they aren't still alive.
One other thing, because there's a good picture of it too, is in the year 2000, you made a different top every day, or was it in 1999 or 2000? I guess.
I can't remember which year.
Yeah, but it was in honor of the turning of the millennium.
The turn of the century.
Turn of the century, and so every day you made a new
turn at the top every day.
And every top had a different pun.
Right.
Like, you don't want to be a topless grandmother, right?
Right. Or something.
Yeah. There's a great picture where you see all those tops that I remember for a while they were all in our living room.
Yeah, they were in that plexiglass.
Yeah.
Oh, I still have them.
You still have them? Well, that's one of the things that's interesting. And there's some pictures of the house because an artist came and did a painting of we have a room that used to be a screen porch that was, your sort of office. And it's filled with all these papers and collections. And it looks sort of chaotic, but this artist came and painted it because there was this like beauty in all of sort of repetition and multiples of these
Don't
collections. So, but
petition say multiples. It's
okay, multiple.
musical.
But the other parts of the house were very spare, like that room you're in. And there was one room, the biggest room in the house, you kept nothing in it, except there was a piano and the walls were blank, the floors were blank.
But Minnie, the molding up around the top had the thing where we could hang.
Yeah, and then you did different exhibitions. But sometimes it was spare. So it's just sort of interesting thinking back on our house that some rooms just had so much stuff and vertebras and kaleidoscope collections and top collections and bird nests and dead bird, stuffed birds, and then other rooms had nothing. We're very spare. So it was these, just interesting going back to Chris's talk about the contradictions.
Well, I think what we should talk about is Hall.
And Hall is my father and her husband.
I mean, and
he supported all of these collections and lived and still lives with them.
I mean, I owe not everything, but almost everything to him.
Wow. I'm grateful to both of you because I feel like on my best days, if I have 10% of him and 10% of you, I'm doing pretty well.
Well,
and I, because when I started the Highline, and I can show people, I'm at the Highline offices. You can see there's the Highline right there. We just reopened. And there's the Hudson River. So I'm in New York. That's a new project called Little Island. They're building on the Hudson River. And there's a picture of what the Highline looked like when I first went up there. And Mother and Dad went up there many times when it was like that in 99 when we started. But I always thought the Highline was it reminded me of you because I feel like you taught me to find beauty in unexpected places or where other people saw something abandoned or weeds. You would find like the cicada, the beauty in it. And but then it was later that I realized, Dad was in the jewelry business, but I felt like that wasn't his main passions were outside of work, and they were parks, preservation, and architecture. And I found a career that is a perfect combination of all three of those things. So I feel like my work or working on the Highline has been this result of learning from both of you.
Well, I also love that Emily Dickinson phrase of speaking of housing and other things. She said, dwell in possibility. And the possibility, it doesn't mean you have to do it. But just, I like that we're feeble, pitiful, thinking just in small, but to dwell in the possible. I mean, not that it's going to happen, but it might. an embarrassment of riches and parents and family and our family.
Yeah.
An enabler.
Was there anything else that we should go over?
Oh,
I have to read this quote that's at the beginning of the book by Kim Stafford, and it says, Pat invited us into her house, and we wandered in the wake of her brimming chatter about projects, schemes, wild imaginings, kites, feathers, colors, fabrics, palpable architecture of some dreamed-up sketch she sketched in the air. I felt the poverty of my own imaginings in her presence. I felt the buoyance of possibility she released into the air we breathed as she swept through room after room, describing a museum of new works yet to be. Like strings of kites, she released into the sky, each lifting the next and the next, until 100 diamonds beaded one string into the sky. She offered a ladder of visions that could lift us up from this world to the next. Just take a step, she seemed to say, and the musical scale of creation will appear for you to follow.
Robert, I think you ought to look at the back page.
That's me. That's when people say, well, why is Rigsby so chubby? I said, I was a chubby kid. Mother, you know what? I still have one of the things the inheritance that I took, in case you did disinherit me. I have this pot because it says Hall on the bottom. That white I stole.
Oh, well,
Don't tell Mills or Jeff. Yeah.
Oh, come again, the wonder.
Well, thank you for doing this, Mother. I know you were a little nervous about what it would be like. So thank you. And
thank you for being who you are.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us, and check out the book. But a lot of people, the title is Name Them, They Fly Better, because that's her, Pat Hammond's theory of aerodynamics. People think the book is about like aerodynamics, I think.
Well,
But there she is flying the kite on one string, my favorite photo. And thanks to Mark S'more for taking the photos, and Emily Walter, my niece, and her granddaughter for taking some of them. And then Heather Snow for really helping put all the pieces together. And Garrett Gott, who designed the book. And of course, Trinity Tom Payton, who really believed in it and who published it. And of course, Chris, the author, who put it all together. And you
the
want
most important person.
Dad, why don't you come in the
sit next to this lady.
Sit in my lap. Oh.
You always tell me now about my suspenders. You see them from
I like your suspenders. Okay, well, thanks everybody, and thanks to both of you, and thanks Nancy for helping put this together. So
we have so much to thank Nancy for.
I know.
Go give Rigsby a hug for us.